you're just flat out assuming that felt experience and consciousness comes first.
So to me, what gives it primacy is the fact that it is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. So I place it, by the time I've placed it anywhere axiomatically, I'm applying logic to felt experience in order to get to a place where you can write melodies, and you contrast that with the number of times you threw things out that took your time, energy, patience, and everything you could put together, right? And so what is it that is pulling you forward to say this is this is something I need to learn how to do?
It's just super fun. That's that's the big thing. I mean, now what led me actually to write this melody. So the topic we're going into is basically Kant versus Vervaeke. That's where we're doing. I don't know if that's like actually a proper dichotomy because they're like really different people, different time periods. But did you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, so I guess I viewed it as a when I read your question on the quad, it's a contrast of Kant's moral framework, the categorical imperative, and I view it, to me, the contrast is between a universal moral law, which is what Kant is proposing, versus a process through which to understand how cognition interfaces with reality in Vervaeke's case. So the way I interpreted your question is you were asking if they were in necessary conflict with one another, is how I interpret, or something like that. And I guess I answered a slightly different question, but I would say I do view them differently in the sense that I view one as a theoretical universal moral framework, and the other as an explanation for how humans interface with reality. And given that the application of one of the reasons, but the application of the universal moral framework in a practical sense, I don't think it's really serious. Like, I don't think Kant's moral or the categorical imperative is I don't interpret it as a practical approach to living more than a universal law that would explain a universal moral principle that in theory would create a moral planet, a moral existence if everyone followed this law, but they don't follow that law, right? And they would never follow that law, not without quite a lot of force.
Well, yeah, the whether or not people follow that law, though, um, the properties of it, the structure, the framework of it seems to Im sort of um, permeate conversations of morality. Because if you're talking to somebody about morality, um, and you go, I'm going to have this advantage, and you're not going to have it, there's going to be a disagreement there. And so the it's for me, the Kant in relation to Vervaeke isn't a question of like, is it is it a actual framework that can be implemented entirely, and and Vervaeke's missing on that. It's more that when people interface with reality, because you said that Vervaeke's model was more about the brain interfacing with reality. When the brain interfaces with reality, one property that it has to contend with is logic itself. And so Vervaeke sort of has this neural network model of mind evolutionarily just kind of almost running a bunch of tracks and then just finding the one that fits best. But he never really addresses the fact that there's this overarching logical logos that cuts through cognition. You know, I don't know if that makes.
So I mean, I think I understand, and this is, where my response went towards consciousness, and I'll probably end up drifting back there, but hopefully in a like an organic way, we get to that place. But so to say that logic cuts through the cognitive interface with reality is a fairly big statement, I think. And the reason I say that is logos is always applied within a frame. And the reason I used consciousness is because experience comes first and then rationality is applied to it. So anytime a human being is applying a rational frame to a problem, they're conscious and experiencing first, and then the frame gets applied. So and to amplify the sort of framework for that, I'd say if there were no conscious experience, if no one were there to witness it, if the tree falls in the wood and no one's around to hear it, but quite seriously, if there's no conscious experience, there is no logic to follow it. And so the way I see Vervaeke's approach to the problem is to say he's trying to understand where people's frames for their logical analysis come from. So in order to apply logic, you have to determine which variables are relevant, towards solving the problem you're seeking to solve. And he would say that's the process of acquiring or of identifying relevance realization. And in the context of intelligence, he would say people who do that successfully on repeat in multiple domains of their life are demonstrating intelligence because they're drawing on an infinitely complex frame within reality. They're drawing out the most relevant aspects in a way that advantages them toward, again, in contrast to everyone else who's trying to do the same thing, presumably, right? But everyone else is applying their version of logic. Well, I think that's a stretch. But if they were to apply logic, they're applying it to their own frame of what is salient and relevant.
Yeah, and I mean that is a very solid argument. What it does, though, and this is my contention with it, it's not as much with the metaphysics of it, it's more with the how did we get those metaphysics? Because so that could be true. That could be entirely true that Vervaeke's model is correct, that uh that a person before ever interfacing with logic, they have this neural network type um exploration, relevance realization that they discover before logic, and logic is a later thing. The issue, though, is that the model is built on logic. And so it's like an ordering thing. Because if somebody
Yes.
was like a God's eye view, like from the outside, they were looking at it like beyond even us, like they were looking, like God was looking at our reality, and he noticed that we we had logic, and then but our actual cognition was based on relevance realization and these these deeper things before logic. That would be an okay observation. But to derive that conclusion logically and then undercut logic itself, how is that
So,
even?
okay. So I guess I agree with you that it's an ordering issue. And this is again why I ground myself in conscious experience because every single idea or rational output that has ever existed as a result of a human being was rendered by their brain into reality. So every single experience that's ever led to any reasonable output in the world started as an individual experience. So in order to even step out and say there is God and there is logic, and then there is this assessment of logic, what I would say is until we solve the problem of how do the mechanical workings in your mind translate into the experience of what it's like to be you, you then go from the experience of what it's like to be you into a logical frame. But the experience of what it's like to be you is the start of absolutely everything. And where I struggle with using logic, for example, as the ordering point is I have to step outside of conscious experience in order to articulate logic. I have to say there's something and which is a sort of naive realism to say that I can step outside of my experience and assess all people using a framework. But in order to step outside of my experience and do that, it starts at my experience. So, and the line that I think is very concise in stating this position as a grounding is that consciousness, this is to me something that has a cap that is objectively true, which is that consciousness is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. So the feeling of what it's like to be me is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. And it's the foundation from which every single logical frame I could possibly apply in an infinitely complex reality comes from, is my experience first. And that's the only reason I order it first, is because I can't, and I've, people try to go upstream of it, and we get into neural networks and a lot of things I don't understand in neuroscience about how the brain runs, but we still haven't figured out how to code or track an action within that cognitive network that explains the feeling of a left finger or the feeling of the color red or the taste of chocolate. These are things that can be described linguistically, but the experiences themselves do seem to arrive to all humans from somewhere. Yeah. And that's where I reduce so to me, it goes experience, and then experience would include some kind of a genuine curiosity. Like, why are we talking about the categorical imperative and Vervaeke's relevance realization in the same context? And to me, that the genuine interest that I had and that you had came before the question, right?
What is your feeling then about like the fact that we can only do any of this from logic? And so even when you talk about consciousness, so an animal has consciousness, they probably have a qualia, experience of what it's like to taste and feel and be. Um, but the animal doesn't have what we would call consciousness, self-awareness. Self-awareness is logical because it's referential. And anything which is referencing anything is by nature logical because it's a that's what logic is. It's the relationships between things and then determining, you know, what those relationships mean. So like um so now to narrow in on a point that I can actually exact at, my issue with Vervaeke is that the framework dispels with logic completely. So the human cognition is in this vat of mysticism, and logic is never touched. Um, and even if logic comes ordered right after uh, consciousness itself, you would still expect that a proper framework of cognition would at some point go, okay, well, logic is a very important property.
Oh, so I see logic in Vervaeke's framework. And I would use, I would almost layer it next to a psychological framework of like automatic system versus control system, right? Intuition. So Vervaeke's framework is essentially that individuals are seeking relevance in the world and then solving problems that are relevant to themselves and then updating their model. To me, that's really similar to how in psychology they talk about the automatic and the control system, and that as you learn things, they become intuitive, right? And then that somehow builds on what you would find relevant next. That's sort of like the internal growth. It's like I've learned something, I've mastered it, and now I don't think before doing it. In driving is a good example of that. You'll be very, very attentive for the first couple of years, and then after a while it becomes second nature and somehow safer too. People's driving stats improve with experience. So I guess that's why I still find his model logical. I think you could debate where the way I view the cognitive model is that the experience that I put at the root, and I wanted to come back to your animal point as well about animals experiencing qualia. We can't prove that that's true, right? So I think it's the bat problem. I think it's a David Chalmers problem. It might be someone else, but is it like something to be a bat? And it's like it's a test, a philosophical test for whether or not we think other things are conscious. And the only conscious I claim to be definitely not an illusion would be my own experience. And my experience in this current moment would be shaped by um, genetics would be a factor that I find easy to believe because there's enough data to suggest that there are genetic tendencies that pass on in individuals. So to some extent, there's a biological component of that's contributing to whatever I say next and do next. And then I think there's also an experience-based component, which to me relates very much to Vervaeke's cognitive interface with the world, is that I'm operating in an infinitely complex reality, and I am implicitly things are becoming salient to me. Like this conversation is very relevant, but all the microfibers of materials surrounding me are not. And so, in that sense, I've learned how to pay attention to those details through practice and experience, and I know how to behave in this circumstance. So there's this element of learned behavior and this element of genetic behavior. And I think there's, in theory, I mean, it's possible that there's even some other component of chaos that enters the system somewhere, which isn't in Vervaeke's model, but it's in my own conceptualization of what's true.
Mm, my reason for going into this in the first place is because I had many conversations with Vervaeke um, fans, people who really appreciate Vervaeke, and I found in the way that they, you know, formulated their worldview that there was this um like like undercutting of logic itself, where trying to recall a dialogos that I was in where the the framework was given that um it isn't really possible to propositionally know the world in some way. And so therefore the correct mode of being is this sort of participatory, you know, acting it out um kind of way. Um and my perspective, I mean, of Vervaeke's model is that his model is cognitive science, and it's a part of cognitive science, but it's not the entirety of cognitive science. And so you can use that and you can learn a lot by acting things out and by participating as opposed to trying to reason through everything. That's a very, very valid approach. But but what do you think about the supremacy of that approach? It seems like you would say the supreme way of knowing.
There, so I don't, I would agree that there, I mean, you can't conceptualize the ontological truth, right? I mean, there's enough, and I made the physics point before. There's there's enough uncertainty in what we know about reality and the cosmos that there's plenty of space in the ontological universe for uncertainty where our logical frames break down. You know, every equation we have has assumptions embedded in it. With Vervaeke's approach, I don't view it as I view it as an observation of how humans interact with information in the world. It's a process. It's a cognitive process that sits downstream of the root of everything. And so it's like, as long as you start with the individual experience, you can move directly from the individual experience towards logic, in my mind, before or well, would it be before or after you apply the cognitive frame? I think it's before you apply the cognitive frame, because indeed, as you say, you can't explain, you can't come up with a philosophy and articulate it consistently unless you've applied logic to it. So I'm perfectly fine with an ordering that says I experience what it's like to be me. I pursue curiosity in what it's like to be me tomorrow, or what it might be like for me to be me the next day after I've experienced, updated my model, and gone back. But in order to pursue that question, I'll need to develop a logical frame and then populate that logical frame. I think that's probably how I would order it is absolutely in order to make sense of the world, you need to apply logic. And we've done it extremely effectively as a species. But where I think you can get, or let's just say that, especially with my engineering background, I come from an environment where people do give primacy to logic very, very often. And I'm always quick to say, hey, just so you know, that frame has been rendered for you by your brain, just like every other thing you've ever experienced in the world. The idea that you're interacting with what is extremely naive, right? So to give primacy to the experience, which to me gives primacy to emotions, for example, before applying a rational frame, which many other people put in a different order, and it's a significantly different orientation towards living.
I mean, I would say that logic is not demonstrably, verifiably what is, but as far as we can reason, it's an absolute that will always be with humans as far as we know, you know, um, because humans have logic, and um, music is one of these things where music is very, very mathematically arranged, uh, where the fifth is a third, and it's a ratio of 2 to 3 from the tonic, and so very, very, it's very close. It's like it's the closest relationship you can have in fractions is the fifth, which is the most important. And so music is tremendously mathematical. And so when composers write music, this is something I'm discovering when they it's not like they can put their own ego into it. They it's not music is less human than people would like to think. It feels so full of emotion, but it's not like the composer was like, "Oh, I have this I'm such an amazing person that myself can be this music forever." It's more that they discover and search for, and yes, add their own take, but like a really good piece of music, a legendary piece of music, a piece that everybody knows, that's a piece of music that is more than the the artist. And just to maybe open up another explosive area of discussion, but when you say that consciousness precedes logic, I I, I don't think that's a coherent claim because eh, suppose there's a Descartes' evil demon who's manipulating your thoughts. So you said in your proof, you're like, well, I remember that I was conscious before, and I remember I'm conscious now. There's this through line of consciousness that could be an implanted memory. Uh,
Yeah.
logic itself could be an implanted memory. Um, and so
But
to
the
to
only, sorry, go ahead.
to say that you know logic is demonstrably real or consciousness is demonstrably real, they feel like they're on the exact same level of like the edge of your perception, and they're about the same like.
So one of them rests upon the other to exist. That's why I order them the way that I do. So for example, the music you just defined, which is perfectly an outcome of logic, to some extent, you're saying that the product once created is almost mathematically perfect, or it's been assembled in a way that doesn't necessarily require a human input. But then I would say, then why doesn't it exist already? And the reason is because everything starts with consciousness, including the concept of logic. So I can pretend many things don't exist, but even to contemplate or Descartes, sorry, even to contemplate the devil or an angel scenario rests upon my conscious, my deliberate placement of attention on that problem. And to deny the feeling that I'm sitting in this chair at this moment, even to deny it rests upon sitting here in this chair in this moment. So it is the start of experience, is the start through which you can then contemplate logic. But before logic can be contemplated, It doesn't exist. But the feeling of what it's like to be does. It necessarily does.
That famous statement, I think, therefore I am. I think this is not a valid way of looking at it, because what you're doing in saying um, that I'm conscious and that this is before, at every single moment, you're making an illogical inference. Um, and I don't mean that in the way of like it's ordered this. I mean like deeply. It's deeply logical to say I am conscious, because what you have is Aristotle's identity. You have a thing, consciousness, and you have I. I am this. It's really, really logical. And so like that's a logical statement. And
I'm
so
not so
if you get rid of
thinking is
logic,
not I wouldn't make Descartes' case for him. So I don't say I think, therefore I am. But qualia exists and then. So the only thing that is definitely not an illusion is consciousness, and everything has to be caused by it. So I think in terms of cause and effect. That's the logical frame that I apply to things. And I'm always asking, well, what has to be true for the next thing to be true? You know, in cause and effect statements, you can say um, this and or this or, but you look for the things that absolutely must be true in order for the next thing to be true. And those are the things that are causal in the sequence. And consciousness is implicitly the cause of everything, at least a cause, because it sits at the root of it. Until we can understand logically how to create consciousness, or even how like, I, which I think is a dream. I mean, and by the way, I know this is an incredibly uncommon perspective, but it's fascinating to me how often people who are committed to logic, including, you know, where I came from in engineering, it was extremely common, or amongst materialist atheists, it's extremely common, but somehow they're able to step outside of their consciousness to assess frameworks, logic, even to consider someone like Aristotle. It it still starts from the same place. I mean, I think innovation and collaboration and our ability to start from where others left off is fascinating. But every time we start from where they left off, we're starting from the only thing that's definitely not an illusion, which is, I wouldn't say thinking. I think there's something before thinking that you can achieve. You can get closer to it through meditation, just by placing your attention on, like I say, you can really put you can focus on the feeling of your left toe. It can feel this, the feeling of your left big toe can fill the same void of attention as any kind of logical problem can. And that's an experience that is necessarily occurring in that moment. You can reduce a single moment to an experience of qualia. And I don't think thinking, I think thinking, it's similar to Descartes, but I think the problem with picking thinking is there are still things that precede it. Experience still precedes it. The automatic system precedes it, which the automatic system, the one that updates itself, that we don't really fully understand all of the automated processes that are happening in our brain, but they just seem to feel like something.
when you say I am conscious, I this precedes it, what are those definitions? Does that it seems like if you were to try to track it down, it would be indistinguishable from just like there is, I think there's something, because consciousness is a really, really like highly loaded term, and what am I is a loaded term, right? You could imagine from a different dimension, perhaps, that that you wouldn't be so distinct from the earth or something. There's a different, and if you look really close at something, you could say, well, this is something which is this is distinct. And so when you say I am consciousness first, you're presupposing a bunch of very, very elaborate definitions that are really, really
No, I mean
baroque.
the definitions came later. I mean, experience has always come first. So to say that I can imagine a hypothetical where I would be, one with the earth or something like this, but I don't need to imagine it very difficultly because you're in a, it's not very, very difficult to do because in this moment there is only vision, there is only hearing, there is. So I mean, one of the things, if you spend too much time meditating, is actually that you do dissolve into the environment that you're in, because it's coming to finding peace with the fact that everything you've ever experienced is rendered from within. It literally comes from your brain. Whatever you see is coming from your brain. We have a perception that only because of our ability to see roughly the same things do we have empiricism and the ability to cooperate. But we're always seeing everything and experiencing everything we're experiencing through our experience. Like I don't know for sure that it is like something to be Josh, but I suspect that it is. And I suspect that, when we get to the question of why are you interested in music, for example, and not, or why the piano and not the guitar, there's an intuitive element of it. And whether you're consciously aware of it or not, that would come downstream of the experience. But I imagine you intuitively feel it as, or experience it as, an indulgence because it's something you choose to spend your time on, right? So there must be some kind of a self-gratifying reason to pursue that endeavor as opposed to an infinite number of other things that you could do. Where do you think that comes from?
Where does it come from? Well, I'm not going to presuppose anything of where it comes from. Uh, I will attack, and what I'm doing is, of course, the deconstructionalist. I'm going to sit here and attack everything position, but like you said that um, what you do know is that everything that you know arose from this state of consciousness. But before you said that animals, we don't know if they have consciousness, and so if we evolved, if we take that model hypothetically, if we evolved from animals, it's not. We don't know if consciousness became before logic. Logic could have come before consciousness. It could have been that in animals, it was either you. I don't know if you said that uh, our neural networks are based on sort of logical cause and effect systems, and so it could have been that animals were unconscious, then logical, and then conscious, and then so I what like so when you ask the question, where did my desires for music come from, I could give you like baroque explanations for that, but at this level I would just say, well, I have no idea. I'm not going to infer, but what I will say though is this, and this is the like really important, the reason why this is a, I think, a very important issue is because that ordering of things where you go, okay, I have a logical model, right? It's a model, and what it's based on, here's logic, it's underneath logic. And it's like, how do you can't do that. You can't go, okay, there's something pre-logic and I'm going to build my model logically on it. Because anything that's based on a pre-logical foundation, an axiom, blows up essentially logically. It de, you know, um, crumbles in on itself.
Yeah. So I don't mean at all to diminish the significance of the logical frame, but experience comes first.
But
So
how do you know that though? Like
because you're
that's a
experiencing, right? The only thing I'm going to assume for a second that your experience in this moment is relatively similar to mine. And the only thing that's definitely not an illusion to me right now is that I'm on a call with Josh and these words are leaving my mouth this moment. And life is the integral of these moments over time. And this experience is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. And it starts with, I don't know, in this case, I have to articulate thoughts that come from my brain and then put energy behind the words that leave them. But this is what we're using these moments for currently. And life is merely a series of felt moments. And that is what arrives first. And then we do, then we think, then we consider, we apply. So attention, the where we choose to place our attention is close to the most fundamental thing. But even conscious, deliberate placement of attention follows, I believe, the felt experience of what it's like to be you. The only thing that's definitely not an illusion. Do you ever get nervous before you get on one of these calls, for example? That's a real measurable feeling that is unique to you. I have no idea what it's like to experience anxiety through your body, for example, compared to mine, but it's real. It's definitely the only thing that's not an illusion when it's happening.
What do you think I'm missing in what you're saying?
The primacy of felt experience.
This is what I don't I this doesn't it doesn't seem rational at all though, because you are you're just flat out assuming that felt experience and consciousness comes first because you can't logically or like demonstrably show it. You're just like
Well,
saying
it's
this is the
it's
way it
the
is.
only it's the only ontological claim that I can make. That so to me, what gives it primacy is the fact that it is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. So I place it by the time I've placed it anywhere axiomatically, I'm applying logic to felt experience. But the logic that I'm applying, so where I struggle is when anyone makes any ontological claims, except for the one, which is that consciousness is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. It's ontologically true in my view. It rests on logic, which is the irony of it. But
It's
it's communicating a felt experience, which is undeniably real because all claims of logic, claims of axiomatic positioning, any logical framework being applied is deliberately applied on top of the experience of what it's like to be you in a current moment.
you're just saying that. I mean, the experience of what it's like to be you, and lots of philosophers say this, it could be an epiphenomena. It could be like you can imagine this model, right? You have a mind. The mind has awareness of the world. The mind has awareness of its own state and its own properties. And when the mind is self-referential, it has this feeling of consciousness. So it has thoughts that are about the world and abstract models that map onto the world, and then it has referential thoughts of those. Um, and when it has those referential thoughts, it, if you like trace it back, like turtles all the way down, it thinks like when it thinks to itself, it goes, "Oh, this thought is this way," and you go, like, "I feel something," and you go, "Well, what do you feel?" Well, it's just what I feel. It's it's
It
not
could
even
be.
entirely it's not even entirely clear to me that when somebody says, "I feel this way," that they do feel that way. I think that people all the time actually think they feel some way and they don't actually feel that way. I think it's one of the biggest human conditions. Somebody thinks they feel hungry. They're like, I feel hungry. It's a qualia. It's a hunger. I would say sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's some you know other
There are
other thing.
there are other non-falsifiables. So when you say it could be, it could be. I wouldn't debate what else it could be. What I would say is, for me, everything's up for debate, except that consciousness is the only thing that's definitely not an illusion. So someone may assess their own feelings incorrectly, but I assume they're reacting to something. Like I could
But
ask you, okay,
now, so that's an inference you're making logically, though, right?
sure.
Okay.
It comes after feeling. I mean, I could describe multiple sensations throughout my body at this moment. My lower back has a slight ache from walking earlier. That's real. And by the time I've explained it, it's maybe not exactly what I'm feeling because you've never felt my lower back pain, but it's real. It's the only thing that's definitely not an illusion in the experience of what it's like to be me.
We could make a robot that is very embodies a human, so it has a human life. And when you ask the robot, well, what is it like to be you? It says, oh, I have this feeling. It's hard to explain. I have this feeling. Uh, and the robot, when he thinks to himself, he references a thought that says he has a feeling, and he goes, oh, I have this feeling. This feeling is who I am. But who's to say that that's not an illusion?
Agreed. So will you believe them? And that's where I think it's called the BAT test, but but that's where the BAT test is very relatable. Is it like something to be a bat? I might say, I think it's like something to be a bat. So that's my gauge for whether I believe it's conscious. If you were to show me a robot and then it described to me the taste of chocolate and you asked me, do you think it knows what chocolate tastes like? I'm going to say, I don't think it does. Do you think it knows what it feels like to listen to Beethoven? It can describe Beethoven. It can give me the lyrics back to me, but will I believe that it knows what it's like? Will it, the feeling that I get in my chest when music, hits just right, something that is definitely not an illusion when I'm experiencing it. I think a robot could do just as well as I could or better with the English language to describe the experience, but I wouldn't believe them that they're experiencing it. So I wouldn't call them conscious. But the bat, is it like something to be a bat? I could say, I think it is. Like, I mean, we know some things from studying bats about their how they listen or they see through sounds and things like. So I'm conceptualizing something, but I'll never know what that's like to experience another consciousness. I only know this one. And the point you make about whether or not it's a byproduct of events going on in the brain. It's very, I mean, that was an argument that Daniel Dennett would make. I've heard this discussion a number of times between him and Sam Harris, but and Sam Harris would take the position that consciousness is it needs to be at least assumed at the root until we resolve the hard problem of consciousness, which is
Oh, really?
we don't know how to simulate the taste of chocolate or the feeling of the color red or, the sensation of smelling the hair of a loved one and what that does to your body. And there's a reaction and you can explain it biologically, but you can't deny the experience from the perspective of the experiencer.
I'm not doing what Daniel Dennett did. Well, I'm guessing he would have been proposing reductionism as a framework. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying the possibility of a reductionist framework renders just knowing something invalid. You go like, I just know that uh, I'm conscious, and I go, but you know, here's an explanation of how that might just be an illusion. I'm not saying that's what's the case. It's you know, um,
Well, but this is where we're being very careful with words. So qualia, if you understand that word, so qualia cannot be an illusion, not as experienced.
there's an interesting thing about qualia though, where it tracks consciousness. So, you're out in the rain, you feel the humidity, the grass, the smell, right? And you're aware of that. If a bear comes out and you're running, qualia is gone. If you're really focused on something, it's that more like expansive, you know, self-referential place where you experience qualia. Uh,
So
you
in the bear example, the way I would describe it is your attention was focused on the experience of the grass. So you were engaged with those that was salient to you in that moment, to use Vervaeke's, language. But what I would say is you were aware of qualia, of what it's like to be you, and then the bear captured your attention. So yes,
Mhm.
this is really fits well for people when you're practicing meditation, for example, to be able to see the interaction with the bear and the experience of the grass in the same plane of experiential existence is really a useful way to start to connect with what sits at the root. You know, you really in your experience on this earth you can control very little, like your hands, your feet and your mouth. And if you focus enough energy on it, your attention. I mean, focus is something that is in, a lot of people try to have the discipline to do it. But you can in any moment focus on qualia unless your attention is drawn elsewhere. And that qualia, or the idea that, or even just like I said, the process of translating the idea that's in my head right now to the words that I'm projecting to you, is where I'm placing my attention at this moment. And that's definitely not an illusion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like maybe it would be interesting to share one of my motivations for why I think this is an interesting subject, which is that I feel there is a, a constant push towards moving beyond logic in some way. And the reason why, and so this in this Vervaeke model, the way I've seen it used is you move beyond logic. So Vervaeke was asked at the end of his intro to intelligence lecture. So he gave this model about like how our intelligence is the relationship between us and something. It's this transjectivity. And somebody asked him, well, how do we best fit ourselves to to be in the right relationship? And he said, well, that's a unsolved problem. We don't know. And so the danger I see with being very candid, because it's not helpful for my argument to maybe expose why I'm doing it, because I can't hide as much. But yeah.
No, we're
Um,
here for honest dialogue. I love it, Josh. This is great. This is the point, right?
oh, I guess the reason I said that is just that this is the point. I'm not basing the direction I'm going off of my motivation. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying like my argument's strong because I see a danger. Like this is just
Okay.
it's not at all for building my argument. Um, but so what Vervaeke's model is and what I see represented in people who um go with Vervaeke's model is that there is this like we don't have any explanation, right? So like to this person, he said, there's no information I can give you for how to essentially fit yourself correctly in the world. And so what it looks like to me for Vicky's model, the conclusion is basically arbitrary social if you really, this is what I think happens if you like really go for Vicky's way, right? So you put aside rational reasoning and your morality is derived entirely socially. You become mercurius. Because if there isn't some kind of logic, then how how, how would somebody who's a Vervaeke enlightened person fare differently in communist Germany? Where do they have like some kind of like, you know, base of morality if it's just based on like transjectivity? Like so like
Yeah.
the Nazis are saying we do this, right?
I think
So
this is a great question. So all I can do is share how I've kind of perceived it, because I'm not a Vervaeke expert, but I've taken a few of his classes. Um, I don't view it as a complete model that incorporates morality, more as an observation of how it works, how the cognitive processing works. And similarly, you know, let's say let's say you let's say okay, here's a good one that I challenge myself on all the time. If experience has primacy. So if experience has primacy, then why not just do cocaine all the time, right? Because then you're just gonna have the qualia will be extraordinary, and it's like, well, you won't have a car very soon, and your bills won't be getting paid, and you won't have a job, and your family probably won't like you very much, and you'll be hungover a lot, and it's not a good long term strategy, right? And this is where I see someone like Peterson, who talks a lot more about meta narratives and looks for the the data to match, or approaches moral problems through multiple uh, scientific, what's the word, uh, sort of bodies of work. It's like he's looking for the same narrative through many, many angles to say, where does this converge? Is there some kind of a uniting universal set of principles that leads to optimal outcomes, something like that? And it's fascinating, for example, to me when I'm learning about psychology and I find out that if you actually pay attention to your emotional responses, you'll take care of yourself fairly effectively. So it's like, whereas before I might have, when I was more logically inclined, I might have built a map based on what I see in the external world. Like, oh, I need to make a lot of money and I need to, I should just do these things, although I don't really feel very good doing it. It's like, well, it turns out that if you allow experience in a little bit, you might find yourself doing work for money that is less demanding because it's also experientially satisfying. So I don't see Vervaeke's work as applying the moral framework. I view it more as an observational tool of how is it that our cognitive capabilities are existing in reality, not not what is the optimal way to approach that. And so I would suggest to someone it's very good to have discipline around your attention, for example. So if you weren't morally guided at all, then you're right, you might just be socialized into your outcomes. But I think good advice you would give to a friend and certainly to yourself is no, you should actually try and be deliberate about where you place your attention, because if you are deliberate about where you place your attention, you'll probably get better at things that genuinely you'd like to get better at. And in pursuing those things, you'll probably have more success than just going with the flow, right? But the basis from which I give that advice is only grounded on empirical evidence. It's like the best you can do. I actually heard that conversation between Peterson and Harris one time when Harris was getting very specific with Peterson about how it actually works, and Peterson was pretty comfortable to just say most people most of the time should just do what everybody else has done that's worked for them, right? Without getting into the weeds. That's generally good advice, is to look at what everyone else is doing and do the same thing. So, and you look at how well humans have done. I mean, again, that's a subjective discussion, but we've managed to innovate, I don't know, to I think an incredible extent. And what a miracle, right? Like the way we've sort of collaborated is is pretty impressive. So people do find their way to socialize and collaborate uh, productively throughout history, despite a lot of failures along the way.
Morally, then you describe sort of people who are logically sort of composed. Morally, do you think there's any absolute morality, or is it sort of this transjective feeling our way through the darkness thing?
Yeah, I mean people think about these things all the time. For me, I I think it's moral to assume equal moral worth of every single human being, because I mean, this is a personal question. I think the way you're asking it, but to me, if experience has primacy, then it's an easy assumption for me that everyone has it. And then, from that, I think you can rationally deduce things like Kant's categorical imperative or the golden rule, right? If you assume other people's experience is as relevant as your own, I think that's a fairly safe moral orientation. But then are there are there meta narratives that are useful? Like, you because that's I just gave you the absolute highest level guidance you could give, but the golden rule is one that I think is relatively universal across cultures over time. Um, I think I still believe there are meta narratives as you get down the hierarchy of big ideas that are relevant to all people, but I am very careful about assuming anything is universal, given that I'll only ever experience my own experience.
Oh, you said at first that you thought like the categorical imperative was like a reasonable thing, but then you said you don't ever want to assume things are universal.
No, it's a principle, right? It's not practical. Like if you were to, so you can say the world would be moral if every rule I lived by, everyone could live by. I can say that and it can be true. But to implement it requires violating their individual moral worth by forcing it
Well,
upon them, right?
yeah, not implementing it, but if you're having a conversation with somebody about how do you set up the moral landscape, you're going to probably, if you're at all civilized, you're going to conform to the categorical imperative.
Something like it. Like I haven't thought enough about the difference between the categorical imperative and the golden rule, for example. But
Right.
I think equal individual moral worth. I'm comfortable putting, standing behind that as a principle that I choose to live by, whether I can prove it to be morally true or not. It's high enough up the hierarchy that, but it sits within a logical frame. There's no doubt. I mean,
Shouldn't that be, though, should that like kind of be the aim of society is to fulfill the categorical imperative, like to um to set rules that everybody follows equally, not to have edge cases and stuff.
well, we have democracy and we have laws, right? And no one would say any of the democracies we have are perfect, but people might say they're relatively effective systems given all other options. And and laws are attempts to uh, create a fair set of rules that applies equally to other people, but then laws vary across borders and cultures. So I mean, there's the reality, which is where we are today and how everyone is living. And then there's Kant's categorical imperative. And so I can say I agree with his moral principle. It sits within a framework that I can't say that everyone ought to agree that it's a universally acceptable moral principle. So, with respect to the individual moral worth of everyone, their right to experience their experience, think what they think, believe what they believe, and act how they want to act within reason and within the rules of the law, and without harming others, then I think they also have the right to say I don't agree with his frame, and I you know would I likely democratically elect the same candidate as that person? No, but they're entitled to that view, and I think it's a widely held view in the world. So it's not going away on its own.
Yeah, I would need to then construct an actual logical moral argument then that would demonstrate some kind of logical morality. But I mean, that's I guess where I'm coming from is I have constructed such arguments. Um, for example, here's a logical argument about like something which relates to morality. So like if a person is authentic versus inauthentic. Now, I'm just broadly sweeping here so that you can see the axioms, what they are, and you can go into them, but it's just an outline for the sake of brevity. But if somebody is authentic, then that means they have higher sensitivity. When something happens in the world, it's some computation or something originating from them. If somebody is not authentic, what do? They have to mimic, copy something, right? They have to play a play a a thing back like a recording, right? And so what we see if we look at a model of somebody who's authentic and somebody who's not authentic is that the not authentic person, the person who has a bunch of space in their mind dedicated to memorized patterns versus the person who is purely seeing things. This person I would say is more conscious. And so, you know, what I'm presenting roughly, and of course it's not rigorous the way I presented it, but is a a priori logical model that says something very strong about morality. That authenticity is this very, very strong thing because it says, well, you get to experience the world more. Now, it doesn't show that in as strong a way as I just said. So like somebody who has recordings, somebody who's like copying people, if they have a better life overall, right? They have a lot of memories they just play back, but overall they have a better life. You could say, well, it's a trade-off. The moral statement I'm making is that if everything else is equal, then the optimal state of being would be a state of authenticity.
Okay. But can you see the axiomatic assumptions embedded in even that logical statement?
Well, but like trace the axiomatic, which ones?
Sure. So, like, let's say on saying whether or not someone lives authentically, where does the word intent factor in that equation? Because there are people who deceive themselves intentionally, and there are people who deceive themselves unintentionally, and then there are people who deceive other people intentionally, and people who deceive other people unintentionally. So even to be able to measure authenticity in another person or to make an assumption about the level of authenticity of a person is a logical framework that's difficult to break down. Like I don't think you can build you can measure authenticity. People now, and actually that would be a good question. How do you know when you're being authentic? Is it a feeling, or is it a measurable outcome?
Oh,
Like,
it's pretty easy. It's just never ever lying, never saying something which you know is not true. That's
well,
all it is.
so but are you familiar with cognitive dissonance?
Right. Yeah, of
So
course.
so there are plenty of people who think they aren't lying, and they're doing it all the time, and you and I are probably included in that, right?
No, I don't, I don't like, what do you mean? Like,
So living with two ideas being in conflict with one another is a form of self-deception,
right. Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, if you have two ideas that are in conflict and you just decide arbitrarily one thing, that's cognitive dissonance. But if you have two ideas that are in conflict, you go, well, I don't know. That's not cognitive dissonance. Like you can hold two different ideas that are
Sure.
non.
But then you may be rationalizing these things away. So I think to go back to the example, so let's say you're making a moral argument about the virtue of acting authentically, right? But the virtue of acting authentically, how do you measure that objectively? I mean, that someone didn't lie. So some people are lying to themselves without meaning to. They
Yeah.
even
So,
right.
well, it's a tricky thing only when it comes to people who lie because if somebody lies some amount of time, then it becomes really tricky to know when they're lying or not. It becomes impossible. So if somebody's like lies a lot, it's impossible for them to know if they're authentic or not. It's like literally not possible. But if somebody never ever lies, then they know they're being authentic.
There are many instances I can think of in discussion where people will say something, they're not careful with their words, and they say something as they're saying it, they believe that it's true. And then on playback, they realize they made too strong of a logical uh, case based on the words that they were actually saying, if you know what I mean. So in
Hmm.
that case, I mean, how would you gauge authenticity in that case? Because now you've got a linguistic mistake. It's like, oh, you just said the wrong words, but you actually thought you were saying you were making the case, you were making a genuine case genuinely, but the words that came out didn't match the internal case you'd made.
Yeah, I mean, and even stronger than that, sometimes, and I have this too, I will almost like from the air pick up this idea that wasn't even mine, and I'll like push it forward, and I'll be like, hold on, that's not even something I think. Um, but the if a person does that and then recognizes it and doesn't do it again, like if somebody says something that they didn't mean or know isn't true, and then they don't continue to say it, then they are,
I
they're
mean,
adjusting.
I don't even know if someone can claim that such a thing as an original idea exists. I mean, everything is, and this is back to, relevance realization as well, but I have no idea what's influenced me today. The world's infinitely complex, and definitely some things grabbed my attention for moments that I'm not consciously aware of that are influencing me now. And it's difficult to piece through that.
For sure. I mean, but the it is still a very, very clear, and like the world is very complex. What is truth? Are you even part of truth? Does not lying make you? Those are serious questions. But the there's a simple, moral rule that a person can have to be as authentic as you could possibly be, which is just never agentically mediate between truth and falsehood. Never take something that you know is this way and then twist it. Yeah, like the world is
Yeah.
complex. People have ideas that are not their own. All this, but if you have an idea and you have a moment, you're like, "Oh, I know this isn't right," and then you still go, you know.
So here's a question then. So where do you, I agree with what you're saying, but I'm just curious. So how do you, how do you make the case that that is virtuous? That is to be that's a recommended strategy.
It's not that it's virtuous. It's that there are more individual conscious moments that are yours. Like that's the only way you can, because if you lie, right? When you lie, if you're at least a good liar, you're acting something out that's not you. They're like, did you do it? And you're like, no. Like, what's all that? Like, no, like the facial expression, right? It's not you because you're faking it. And so when you're doing that, like you're certainly not yourself. And so the only like the the moral the thing I'm saying is not that it's necessarily better, or that, I'm not going to go that far. It's just that if you want to have more conscious moments that are you, right? And again, you can say, well, maybe they're not even you. Well, fair enough. But if you're even going to have a shot at doing that, then it would be through not playing back scripts.
Let's just explore that. So, I mean, I use the word integration to describe, I think, what you're describing often, that it's the idea of integrating your external world with your internal coherence. So you formulate sort of an internal coherence of what you is, what yourself is. And then the better you can mirror that in reality, the more aligned you tend to feel and the lower my anxiety is. So, I mean, I would make a case for aligning your external persona with the internal persona to the extent that you can, based on my own personal experience. And I would give that advice to people, but it is hard to make an objective case for why that should work more effectively, for example, than lying in a job interview to get a higher salary.
Why that's different? Why lying in a job interview is different than having a persona? Why it's
So
difficult to have a persona that's not entirely yourself? Like if I understand what you're saying that in order to be a person, you have to have an ego, and in order to have an ego, you have to sort of line yourself with ideas that are not yourself and all this. And so you don't see a distinct line drawn between the your personality and lying just outright.
no, I'm saying, why would you make a moral, how would you conclude that it's moral to align the internally coherent self with the external self, essentially not lying? Why, what would lead you to say that that is good, or that is the optimal outcome, as opposed to lying when it suits you?
Wait, I'm confused. Lying when it suits you versus lying. You're talking about two different types of lying.
No, just one kind of lying. I mean, presumably the reason people lie is to improve is because they believe it will improve their situation
Right.
immediately. And so, I mean, I think that's why at least a lot of the intentional lies, and then the unintentional lies we talked a little bit about. But let's say we were making a moral case to say, you really shouldn't do that. You ought to You ought to say what you believe to be true. Why would we say that? What would be the case you would make?
The case is that what a lie is acting something out. So it means that you observed something in reality, you copied a bunch of different phenomena, lots of them, hand movements, facial postures, all these things. You stored that in your mind and you played it back. Now, when I learned music and piano, uh, there's two ways to do it, and both ways are valid, by the way. Um, because even like a person could become a liar and they could be a truth person, and they both go very far directions, and they don't. One person is not higher than the other person because it's you have to go very very far, I think, before you see that difference. But uh, in music, I mean, I got to think of a different analogy other than music because I always go back to it. But in music, you can memorize the notes exactly, or you can understand the music. You can understand it, and if you understand it, you don't have to memorize as much. And so, memorization, it's like if a person has to store more trivial uh characteristics than actual ones, it's they must not be able
Yeah.
to have as much meaningful computations.
I had a manager I once worked for. He was giving me advice on public speaking, and he said, just tell the truth and you never have to remember anything. And a lot of people have gotten that advice, that it's a common and excellent piece of advice, and it's totally aligned with what you're just saying, which is if you build an internally coherent story and then you go and externalize that internally coherent story, it's the least amount of energy requirement. So you can do
Exactly.
more. It's efficient. And another argument one would say is it probably reduces your baseline anxiety, because if anxiety is entropy, then what you've done is eliminated a whole lot of entropy by keeping it simple and keeping it straight. And I think it's an excellent case. It's certainly I would make the same case towards someone, but in that same light, I can imagine there have been more than one Hollywood actor who took a $10 million salary to go play a role they were fundamentally misaligned with. And they probably did it, for months on end, working insane hours. And that's what life was. It consisted of was playing a role for pay. And it's extremely common that people make sacrifices for uh, well, for things like that, for resort, they make decisions and they deceive themselves. And there's the dissonant situation where it's a rationalization of the misalignment. It's like they're misaligned and they're rationalizing the pain that they're suffering because they think that it's necessary, for example, or they haven't worked through it. But I do think it's a recipe for success to say, actually, if we can just figure out how to align what you would genuinely like to do with what you're actually doing, that is the best possible thing that you can do.
I would say definitely nowadays, I think there's probably many examples a couple years ago of people who were very poor, who had no prospects, and they got really good at playing other people, and then they became tremendously wealthy and famous through their acting abilities. I think that's something that happened a lot. I think that the internet changes that a bit, and it makes that dichotomy a bit less probable to have a really spectacular outcome.
Lower like so with you're talking with respect, I mean intentional manipulation. You think that manipulation's less likely now than it might have been.
You know, I feel like we probably have the same experience if we look back at the people who were the stars, the people who everybody talked about, everybody looked up to. Those people were actors a while ago. Those people were, now I look at them and they go, oh, they're very, very fake, lots of them. Um, Now, the stars, the people everybody talks about, these are the most authentic people. Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan. And so what I'm saying is that like the higher bandwidth of communication that we have makes it much more difficult to sustain that kind of thing versus back in the day you could kind of just take those characters and play them and make a lot of money.
I wouldn't be, so I'm not, it's not, I don't have the same intuition as what you're describing that it, it's almost like the narcissists used to get away with it and they don't anymore. I feel like there's actually more of both. Like I certainly think that there's a thread of authenticity. So we started this conversation talking about how much we're drawn to the PA quad. And for me, a lot of that is, I call it that people show up in good faith. It's like, I really don't have time and energy for people who don't show up in good faith. And so I want to be, and, or you can call it signal versus noise, something like that. I feel like there's high density signal on the PA quad. I rather have 5 people engage with me there meaningfully than hundreds elsewhere. And so I'm certainly drawn to authenticity in the way you describe, but I don't know that there's more or less of it in public domain now. I do think of it as a virtue. Um, I admire it, aspire to it, and the people that that I seek to embody, that's truth is very high on their moral framework, or close to what they worship uh, as a principle. But I think there's plenty of people who are successful today that don't share that, whether they do it
Yeah.
intentionally or not.
And like we're in, territory of more heuristics and probabilities and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know, how do I feel about the core topic? Because I think basically what happened is we got to a point where I would have to demonstrate an actual logical proof, which I do think I have, but I shouldn't even say that because I got to write them out first. I got to like actually be able to lay them out in a way that's tremendously convincing, because I was, trying to verify why, um, why logic is a good basis for morality because you can build absolute morality. This is my idea. This is I think is a really good idea because it allows you to really harmonize a lot better with people if you have this like shared understanding like, oh, there's a way of thinking about things where we can work with the same axioms and we can come to the same conclusions. Now, I wonder what interests you, like what drives you about these kind of conversations? What's your motivation? Uh, because that's kind of more like my, I've had several discussions about that where I go to that kind of thing where I try to prove logically morality because I see the benefit of it, but I wonder where your motivation comes from.
Well, okay. I want to respond to the first comment about um, the idea of a universal morality and being able to use logic to explain a universal morality. Today, I was listening to one of the Nietzsche courses, and in the lecture, Peterson's talking about very similar to what you and I are discussing today. He says it's in the Declaration of Independence. There's the statement, "We hold it to be self-evident that all men are created equal." And even such a statement, it's still axiomatically holding it to be self-evident. Self-evident to who, when, and under what circumstances, right? There's a massive level of assumption that sits in everything that we do. So my key point around trying to use logic fundamentally is that you will there are an infinite number of logical frames you can apply to an infinitely complex universe. And so the idea that someone can apply it perfectly and universally, I don't believe that's true.
See, that's a really good point though, because the thing about logic, you have an infinite number of frames, so you have like 1,000 frames. They're all hitting the same issue. They have different logic, right?
Now we're talking. You're converging empirically on an outcome.
Well, no, no, no. I'm saying like what you're saying. So you have a bunch of different logical arguments. This one says this is moral. This one says logically, no, this is moral, right? Uh, with proper epistemology, one can show that there's a contradiction. A logical frame will be internally erroneous or erroneous in the broader scale of philosophy. And so that argument that there's an infinite number of them, and also going back to the what you said about um, all men are created equal. I think that that can be demonstrated logically as well through basically a very simple argument that goes like this. Um, if you have a mind, a cognition, it has circuitry, it has ideas. This could be conscious. It doesn't have to be a physical mind. It's just the idea of ideas and beliefs as they shape actions. So you have a mind, right? If there's some part of that mind that goes about about a certain human, it goes, okay, I like all these humans, but this other human I just don't like for whatever reason. What that does is that undercuts what it means for that person to have empathy at all. Because if they are able to, for one person, go like, "Oh, you're not human," then why are they picking the other people as being human? It must be incidental. It must be because they're in their environment. It must be just because
I know
they like them.
I know some dog lovers who genuinely love dogs more than they love people. I don't understand it and I don't relate to it, but it's genuine. It's genuine. And
Man, it's so interesting.
there are genuine people in the world who genuinely do not see the equivalent moral worth across other groups of people. Historically, that's been true for humans. So I don't make the assumption of equivalent universal moral worth as a moral principle that everyone abides by. It's just one that you and I share, and
Um,
many other people, but many don't, and they're
that's a,
genuine.
that's a really good example of the dog because that's less of them having something against humans and more of them having something raised up. But um,
Well, that's an interesting perspective. You think so? I mean, I've thought about that one quite a lot. I think that's really interesting. So you think that it's just that they've that the dog has become so uniquely special in their life. I mean, what about I don't doubt there are many people out there who value a dog they've never met over a person they've never met.
true. Now, I actually didn't mean that. What I meant though was like the logic of it. So that if the person loved dogs as opposed to not liking humans, it undermines my logic more because my logic was that the a human mind that doesn't like one human, then you can ask, well, how do you have any love at all? And but if they have love for something else, that's why I was referencing that. I think that probably people who like dogs more than people have bad experiences with people. I would say probably.
I think there's probably a range of reasons. I mean, I think that's one of them. Some of them I think people use. Well, I think uh, it's so interesting having this. So, are you a dog? Do you have a dog?
I don't have a dog. Do you?
No. And but like it's so fascinating because people who don't have dogs or don't, there are people who have dogs or have pets and they think we're all psychopaths if we don't have them, right?
That's interesting.
And they're very sincere in that. Some are very sincere in that belief. And whereas, I always view it like, well, it's additional responsibility. I can only handle so much responsibility, and I look for the most meaningful responsibility I can. And so I have kids, I'm like, but I don't have,
But
you know,
like so it's a lot of responsibility. I'm the same way, practical, but think about what the people did who had dogs and cats. They they produced all this variation and variety for us. Just because people wanted to have animals, they bred animals. We have all these variations. If people didn't do that, what would we have? Like a wolf or something? Like,
well,
and dogs are smarter now. Like you know, we wouldn't have any experience of going out and like seeing a dog. It's actually just the people who just want to be with dogs that have created that. So it's a I would say it's an people think about it as like, why would you do that? It's longer term than the individual. It's almost like
oh yeah,
it's
the relationship between domestic animals and people is part of the evolutionary story. I listened to I can't remember which documentary it was, but I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson was explaining the evolution of the dog. And I mean, here's the basic principles, and take it with a grain of salt, but it's essentially, we were vulnerable and sleeping at night when it was dark, and we couldn't see at night, so we domesticated wolves, and we feed you, you protect us. And wolves established that principle. And then um I think he even shared the theory that wolves started to get smaller teeth and cuter faces because that's what was appealing. It increased their likelihood of being cared for by humans. So we would be more likely to feed the cute ones. And it's the same reason babies are cute, that they're 100% dependent. And so you need to have something that adult humans look at and go, oh my goodness, what an incredible creature. And I thought that was just fascinating. And I watched another documentary recently where a guy was living in some remote part of the world, and he was doing research on the salmon spawning cycle. And he noticed that these packs of wolves would follow him, and he sort of was watching this evolution happen slowly in real time. Like, this pack could have attacked him for a single meal, but they intuitively knew that he was a source of food for them other than his own flesh and blood. It was like, he'll lead us to the fish and get them for us. And he built this relationship with this wild pack of wolves over a series of months, and they did really well living in collaboration with him.
Shouldn't we be able to evolve monkeys to humans if, I mean, I'm a fan of evolution, but like, shouldn't that be something we can do? Because if humans did evolve from monkeys, I'm not sure where you stand on it, but if they did, we should be able to do that. I'm surprised that monkeys are so
Well,
irresistibly unintelligent.
I'm sure I don't have a clue, but it's just fun to talk about. The, I mean, I conceptualize a time on the planet when most variations of Homo sapien existed at the same time. I think it's just that very few of those variations survived. Like, I think it's more a question of, how did monkeys make it, right? Look at the creatures that
Yeah,
made it alongside
I mean,
humans and look at the ones that didn't.
yeah, I mean, but I'm just thinking like, what was it that made humans evolve to being so intelligent? Something about maybe having to fend for themselves with, using tools or something made them really intelligent. And I just feel like whatever that is, monkeys are so close. Shouldn't we be as humans be able to like steer animals in the right direction by giving them the same pressures that we had?
I'm not an expert on this, but like, for example, cooked food is one of the, like, so cooked meat is one of the reasons I think our brains grew bigger, and monkeys don't cook meat, right? So
Right.
there's at some point we figured out how to, you know, on the evolutionary cycle, one species figured out how to increase the concentration of caloric intake, or, I always just, that's how I conceptualize it, like a series of very small adjustments that then take generation, I mean, extremely long periods of time to transform. So then I always find it just more interesting that, hey, we've still got chimpanzees in the jungle and we've got humans, but what about like all of the intermediary steps, right? Of the evolutionary cycle. Where did all those go? Like, there's a gap. That's the one that fascinates me more.
Where do you think humans are going to go in like, yeah, the next 1,000 years? Like, it's because like looking at our relationship with dogs and cats and how like we really changed them and these different things. Do you well, what is our relationship going to look like with animals, and like are animals getting smarter, and like what's the limit of that? These are I guess I'm not asking them necessarily
I
for you
haven't
to. I'm just
I haven't
interested.
thought about it. I haven't thought about it that much. What do you think?
I think it's interesting that nobody talks about it. Like everybody is like, in their house basically helping animals get smarter, and nobody's like, well, what's going to happen? They're going to get like really smart? I don't know. It's just an interesting.
Well, I mean, I think animals exist for a reason, right? I mean, it's like when people talk about super intelligence and whether or not humans will have a role when they're super intelligent. It's like, well, animals have a role and humans are relatively super intelligent. We could have gotten rid of every living creature on Earth aside from ourselves, but haven't, right? And then you can say, well, what's the intrinsic worth? It's like, well, I think universally we agree that for example, some kind of a moral treatment of sentient creatures. It's like it's just implicit in the fact that we don't generally tolerate unnecessary cruelty. I mean, even that's being too generous. I think probably some vegans out there would point me to some pretty nasty, material and stuff like that. But I think for the most part, animals are here because humans want them to be. I mean, I do think that um, we're in a position to have some influence on that as a species. And then the question is, where's the human species going? And it's like, well, it's going where we take it, I think. Right. So I'm personally quite, I'm very supportive of interplanetary type models and the aspirations of guys like Elon Musk, because one of the things I really like about having infinite expectations about what humans can do is then at least we create a unifying principle of collaboration and success towards some kind of a common goal. If you don't aim towards some kind of an infinitely prosperous and dreamlike future, then what are you choosing as an alternative, and why?
100%. Yeah.
Right?
Also, I think it's good that the bears didn't evolve to have consciousness, or they would have probably enslaved us all and just farmed us. I mean, we're doing it a bit, but I don't think they would have been as nice as we are.
So this is good, two Alberta guys. I'm actually from. Are you from Alberta originally, born and
Oh
raised?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan originally. But what's so funny is how, bears were a normal part of our lives growing up. You go
Yep.
any and yet, like, and my kids, they even tease me because I don't like snakes. My wife doesn't like spiders. There's all kinds of animals in the world that just scare me. Like, I think about going to visit friends in Australia and stuff, and I'm like, man, there's so many creepy crawlies I don't want to be near. But when you look at all the animals around the globe, and then you tell people, "Oh no, I've had many encounters with bears in the wild," and they would say, well, "Then why are you worried about a snake or anything for that matter?
You've
Nothing,
actually
you
you've
know."
actually had encounters with bears? I haven't. I mean,
Oh
bears for me
yeah.
are like this mythical thing. When I was young, I saw a movie of a bear and I just was terrified. Just like it was this movie of this bear coming into this house and it was climbing up and the people were like running and I was just scared of bears forever. But,
But
you know,
you're surrounded by them, right?
yeah, it makes me scared of the dark. That's about it.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, no, I've encountered so many bears, whether hiking or like if you spend time in the Rocky Mountains, you just look for the long rows of cars along the road and you see
Oh
what they're,
yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, I've
you
seen bears. Yeah, I guess I've seen them. Yeah. Yeah, I saw a bear actually running across the Clearwater. I don't know why I said I haven't encounters with bears. I guess I'm thinking of encounters with bears of like actually a bear like attacking me or something. But
right. But this is the point,
yeah, I've
right?
seen
This is
bears.
the
Yeah.
point. We're like, yeah, they're out there. It's like, well, are you going to go hiking in the middle of the Rocky Mountains? And yeah. Are you going to encounter a bear? Maybe. Yeah. Are you going to go? Yeah. I'm still going to go. I'm going to bring this little can of spray and convince myself that's enough. But I think for the most part, you just know when you grow up around them that it's not like they're looking for trouble. You just make sure they hear you coming. But they are, they
Yeah.
are a really intimidating creature. Maybe the most dangerous. Well, maybe the most capable of all animals on Earth. Maybe the most capable of destruction. But I wouldn't, necessarily say they're the most. They don't scare me that much. I think they mostly just want to be left alone.
Yeah, they don't, I mean, until I see one, I yeah, I don't I'm not too scared because they're pretty rare.
Yeah.
Um what what do you think is you're talking about Elon Musk and like, his like aim at the stars kind of thing gives humanity a direction. My direction is kind of this different where it's like aim at art, aim at these logical morality things. How can we make this planet as good as possible? what what do you think is like the highest aim people can have, and more specifically, like what is your objective? What do you find is the core mover in conversations?
I mean, I'm searching for meaning. Continue, I search. So uh, yeah, I think that's probably uh, searching for things that seem to perpetuate growth, um, being able to become everything you can become primarily relationally in the world with other human beings. something along those lines where, and I find that the likelihood of me being able to do everything that I can for others involves this sort of orientation towards growth. And then it's like, well, how do you know which direction to grow? And that's a combination of intuition and rationality and self-reflection that I do on some frequency to try and optimize. But yeah, I'm seeking some kind of an optimal outcome, and it's an iterative process that I continue, to reflect on, and then sometimes you kind of sometimes we've spent a lot of time talking about individual moments of experience on this call, but like sometimes weeks can go by and you realize you've been paddling in a slightly wrong direction and you just make a correction, and you just begin again. So I generally, that's another reason, because of the primacy that I give to the current moment, I have practiced quite a lot just the process of beginning again, seeking to optimize, regrounding and going. But I'm mostly trying to live coherently, peacefully, and um, and I think, I my personal beliefs, I believe things like truth and is a virtue that it's worth pursuing. And it's mostly anecdotal. It's because it's been a felt experience for me that when you pursue, like the description we gave earlier about authenticity, it's just an easier path and it's a more interesting one, and it's more self-sustaining than one in which you have to lie, which is a ton of work. Um, but obviously it has some drawbacks. When you're too honest too often, you end up having to take more risks than you might be comfortable. Like I don't know how you felt the first time, for example, you wanted to do a recorded conversation. For me, that was a big step, but it was almost necessary. It was like, look, do you want to be able to have interesting dialogue with people all over the world about these topics, or don't you? And I was like, yeah, I really do. I think it's genuinely worthwhile. And maybe I help you and you help me, and then something even better comes of it, right? So yeah, something like that. It's not too grand, but I do what I like about ambitions like Musk's. It's similar to how I feel about the concept of people going to church. It's like the more you can create communities of people who agree that we don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree on few principles that involve us aiming upward, like the Peterson Academy motto, the Tenda Supra. It's that kind of a mindset. Wherever you can find people who are at least committed to that objective, I think that's a good thing.
You you said you're interested in you just really enjoy conversations about like philosophy and like that kind of like back and forth, like kind of, working things out. Is that connected to meaning, like explicitly?
Absolutely.
Like, of course it's meaningful. I just mean, like, do you see like the link between why you do these kind of conversations and a meaning?
Yeah, they're stabilizing for me. So if I stop questioning and I stop creating friction around questioning, then I start to lose myself. So I function, for me personally anyway, I function with with limited grounding, but sort of a continuous openness. And that can be really destabilizing because there's so much information in the world. So the way I create balance is by creating that opponent processing in every direction that I operate. It's like just continually optimizing my questions. I'm looking for better questions. And I love to think. I love to think. I mean, I don't know what kind of a statement that is, and I don't know what, there's something to be said for what I find salient versus what someone else does, but I really like solving problems, like defining a problem statement and then hearing an idea and then just beating on that idea until it gives out and finding out where it gives out. And just having explored the idea, I feel like there's a corner of the universe I don't need to go back and explore with as much detail, but it never goes away. And I maintain the open question. And then it only just becomes, so what I would say is it's more likely I'll talk to anyone about anything as long as it's been thoughtfully considered than that I had, before you mentioned Kant's categorical imperative, I'd never read about it or heard about it. Your question prompted me to go and research it because it sounded interesting. And that led to this conversation in a way, right? I
How do
just
you
really
feel?
like, yeah.
How do you feel like your analytical philosophy, just like logically deducing things maps onto the continental philosophy, the historical, what people did. I ask that because like I feel like when I study philosophy, I'm not studying new ideas. I'm studying the location of where those ideas come from, like especially ancient Greek. Like when I'm looking at the ancient Greek philosophers, I'm just like, like yeah, all these ideas I had when I was a kid, these like, wonderful, like what is a thing kind of ideas. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I mean, that's fascinating. So I've always respected people who can get into the characters of the past. I'm, I don't learn by reading a lot of history. I explore ideas. So, like, I'll give you an example. I'm more interested in this conversation with you than I am in diving into Aristotle. And the reason is because I just think the likelihood of me being able to access a more sophisticated level of complexity in a in the current moment in a human engagement is higher. And I also, even when people talk about what life would have been like 100 years ago, or like, conversations I've had with my grandparents or something, I cannot imagine what their experience would have been like in contrast to mine. So I can accept the fact that your experience across many domains would be more comparable to mine, similar ages, similar backgrounds, where we come from in the world. There's enough similarity. So then you might say, well, wouldn't you be more interested to talk to someone that's completely different, or to read about someone who originated this idea? And I'm like, no, I might be more interested to hear it from Josh and then to explore it with him. It's just, maybe that's my own learning, um, my own approach to learning. But similarly with Nietzsche, I don't know that I'll ever understand Nietzsche, and I don't know that I'll ever, if I ever could understand Nietzsche without hearing Jordan Peterson's voice or his framework being overlaid on top of it. It's like you know that my experience has involved hearing about Nietzsche from guys like him, or a few, or Hicks or something like this, right? And it's like, do I know anything about Nietzsche, or am I just merely getting a framework from two credible professors? And so, you can get the essence of the idea, but I get so much more out of digging into to depth with it with somebody else who's here with me in the now that can explore it together.
I feel like it's possible that those philosophical ideas get integrated by people. So when Aristotle gave his ideas, before that, people didn't think about what logic was. You know, many years after that, everybody knew what logic was, what these things were. Um, even Jordan Peterson, his ideas he had a lot of ideas that were new to the public. And, I absorbed these ideas and I would try to tell other people about them, but people are not that interested. And then I would see the same people coming back later and be like, oh, look at this idea. I'm like, yeah, that was Jordan Peterson. That was the first place I think that public was introduced to the idea. And so it's possible that when a philosopher comes out, that information gets really distributed into the collective consciousness. And so the only place you can do philosophy really is in a conversation,
I
I
I
feel.
I think that's really well said. I think that's so interesting. You know, he I just heard him say in one of the other lectures talking about the in primate groups how it's not the tyrannical primate that leads the group. It's someone who can negotiate peace in amongst the tribe, and that two relatively weak primates can still overpower one relatively strong one. And that's so funny because that's exactly, it's the same line of thinking that you're talking about. It's the effects of collaboration between human beings. I find it really I find innovation fascinating. I'm very comfortable. I'm also quite bothered by concepts of plagiarism and like um, uh, uh, selling other people's ideas as your own. I'm not so concerned with whether ideas are original. I'm very comfortable thinking of myself as a node in a network. And it's like, what can you do in your silo? Like, what kind of thinking capacity and processing can you do before you send it back into the system? Right? It's like you can create some value with the idea. You can shape it, you can play with it and mold it, but then you hand it back and they do something with it. And that's how collaboration seems to progress. So it's like there's no point in trying to live in your silo and then isolate a fence around you and say, here, this is mine. It's not intuitive for me to work that way. You're going to miss out on way too much trying to solve everything on your own. It's one of the reasons I really love AI, to be honest with you, is I just find it to be such an efficient mirror that it absolutely no bullshit. And you can the ability to use it as a thinking partner and to hold up an emotionless mirror and just attack problems. um yeah, I find it very efficient for that, but collaborating with a person is even better.
AI is it's tricky in one way when it comes to analytical philosophy. It can't do it. Like it only does continental philosophy. So like when you if you give it an analytical philosophical problem, here's a logical conundrum, um, and it's never been proposed before, then it's really good at generating rhetoric. That's one thing to like. I've gotten like arguments with the large language models because there's an argument, there's like a philosophical position or something, and I'm like attacking it, right? And I'm attacking it from all these angles, and I'm tearing it down, and I keep doing this with the large language model, and it keeps coming up with like solutions, and I'm like, no, I proved that wrong, and it's like, no, 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 but this one here, and I'm like, no, 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 but you're not tracking the logic, and I start to realize like, oh, it's sometimes it's just like pulling up sources that it's saying it's this way, but
Yeah.
it's actually not. No, but I do agree.
It's
I do agree
limited
that
by the quality of your own thinking. It's limited by the ability for you to, it's limited by your own ability to frame your thoughts and attack your ideas. Like if you do not have a rigorous framework already, then simply relying on it to provide you with a framework isn't going to enhance the quality very much. But if you have a rigorous thinking framework already,
yeah.
the
Oh yeah,
relationship the
100%.
relationship anyone has ever had. Like I think about journaling, right? Like journaling in and of itself is a great way to integrate ideas and to you put them down on paper, you start to think through them. And even that, just getting it out of your head and onto a page can help simplify the process. Rather than ruminating for months, you can think for minutes with paper and pen. And then I just think of AI as being supercharged paper and pen. It's like, wow, you're going to give me novel ideas back. Or even if you just hold up a mirror to what I just told you, sometimes, it's similar to the effects of a conversation. When somebody says back to you what you just said, only simpler, they don't realize what a profound gift they've just given you, right? They've just reduced your baseline load. It's like, hey, you can now carry that idea around in your head with fewer words. And yeah, it's that's what I get so often from AI that I'm fascinated with.
Yeah, I mean, even when it's like being like when it's being a sophist and just like generating garbage arguments, that's really helpful because then I can like, there's nothing that's improves your ability to think like arguing against somebody who's like really good at generating bad arguments because you have to like really know your position. That's interesting you say though that like you're not concerned about being like the top or original or some way. I think that's just a very valid way to think about it because I don't think you can be the top of anything. It's just like people are different places in time. Like Aristotle back in the day was amazing, but like everybody now is, I think that's what I'm kind of hinting at is everybody now is like smarter than Aristotle because that information gets like distributed. People now know concepts that he couldn't even fathom, just average people. And so, you know, if you think about reality as like a four-dimensional landscape, this person is better in this time, but like it's trivial. Then, you know, then somebody in front of him is better than him.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so, I mean, I think this is you can look at this from the perspective of human flourishing as well. Like, um, I've heard Musk talk about the fact that as we've added humans to the planet, we've become smarter, more capable, better fed, wealthier. It's like, instead of this scarcity mindset, it's like, no, actually look at the correlation between human population growth and the average, in terms of basic needs being met, for example. It's like we add people and we clearly cooperate as a byproduct. Now, but you can also raise the question, well, have we increased existential risk, for example, through our existence? Or I asked a question on the quad a few months ago, which was, when in history do you think we've been most connected? A person has something like, at what point in history do you think an individual had the best, highest likelihood of encountering the truth? And that's a very loaded question, right? Because you can believe that we've got more data now, but have we lost something? Like, to what extent would you be? So I tend to be of the belief that this is the moment in time that we could have had the opportunity to incorporate as much information as possible coherently into a deliberate decision or outcome or conclusion. So I give the current moment the best chance of being close to the truth. But I can understand where people are coming from when they think about simpler times, or uh, uh, depending on how they define truth, how they may have been able to approach that when the world was a lot less noisy, when the concept of your individual role in context was much more significant, rather than being 1 in 9 billion, maybe you thought of yourself as one in a community of 10 or 100. And what would that have done to your experience and your ability to simplify the world and engage with things that maybe we work really, really hard to try and get to now, and we don't arrive as successfully as they did in that context. Find so I like your frame of a 4D world, to think about people across an equivalent plane regardless of when they existed, and then to say, why would you give them an advantage? And I don't. I mean, I really think the fact that you and I can both attend Peterson Academy and learn from those people is such a unique opportunity throughout history. I mean, even compare it to what it was like, when would you have had access to the best professors on the planet ever, without knowing the right people, having the right family balance or entrance level exams to gain access to a university, and then once you're on that campus, to be fortunate enough to get into courses that are waitlisted and things like this. Whereas now we just all get to learn from one another in a very open and free way. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I feel like this is the start of a new way of people doing learning. I really think that Peterson Academy may be, people look back at, in years and go, yeah, that was the start of like the biggest thing that happened to the education system. I just think it's a better system than a land located, politically and monetarily restricted system. I think it's way better.
That's the Bitcoin of education. I'm totally with you. Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. I think you're right. I think we're in a unique um position, and it's a really nice opportunity and time to get to be. Were you one of, like, did you start right from the beginning, or have you been around pretty much the entire time, or you found it later?
I was there close to the beginning.
Yeah.
I was thinking about getting it as a pre, but I didn't, and then I just got it a bit later.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I really tell friends about it. I think it's a great platform, and it has huge potential.
yeah. Well, how do you feel about conversation? You want to keep going, or you want to wrap it up?
Uh
I'm
I'm
good.
probably tired, man.
Yeah,
I mean, I could go, let's another 15 minutes or something, and then we'll shut it down. How's that
sure.
sound?
Sounds great.
What do you have going on tonight?
Oh, nothing. I mean, it's just the music. Music was, it's exciting, but this is exciting too.
What do you
This
think?
is
So I think I'm definitely of the opinion that art is going to feature that, the value of openness and creativity is only going to increase as the data center build out and the electrification happens, and we start to become more dependent on AI. I think it creates so much opportunity for creativity. How do you feel about that as a musician?
yeah, there's this interesting thing where I feel like I know secrets of music composition. They're like esoteric, like true esoteric things um that when I discover these things, I realize like, oh, this is an understanding which is so absolute. If you know this, then you can write better melodies. It's like concrete, and I can tell it. But it's interesting to me that like this is not something that I could even fathom that I could have come to understanding through uh, even the internet. And so, I feel an interesting opportunity of potentially being at the forefront of like sharing information about music, just to like maybe make it more less abstract. It'll just sound really maybe vague, but like so first of all, like music is it's an odd thing because everybody understands music like really deeply. The reason we like music is because we really understand why it's good. You listen to a good song and you go like, "Oh, that's good." It's just like it's doing amazing things. Um, and so anything I explain about music, I feel like, I have to caveat it and say like you do deeply know this, but to conceptualize it and actually work with it. This is a really long-winded response to that question. I don't think yeah, I don't
Well,
know.
I'm very interested in it. So, would you call it intuition? Do you have an intuition about music?
Well, what it is it's understanding the landscape. It's understanding where you can go, what chords lead to what things, what those sounds are. And then the basis of it is resonance. It's like you yourself resonating with the possibilities that like allow you to go in those places, but those structures are very, very real. And so, here's an example of how concrete music is. So if you want to write an epic piece, think about like Pirates of the Caribbean, kind of like epic music. What epic music does is it makes like very, very bold melodic steps towards strong chord changes, really powerful chord changes. And those chord changes have to be like you have a wheel like this. The chord changes have to be like far apart from each other, right? Because they have to all like be, you know, distant from each other. If this one's distant from this one, but then it goes back to this one, it's like, oh, these two are close. Like it's in high dimensional space, right? And so, um, in order to write an epic piece, it's like really difficult because you have to find a melody which, in simple patternistic ways, moves strongly to a new chord in a way that's interesting. That's just a feeling of like the kind of structure in music. I don't know if that made any sense at
No, but
all.
it's it does. So what I find fascinating is, so imagine you were to go into AI and you were to say, describe as much as you possibly could in a conceptual way about what makes a world class, an epic piece, as you said, right? I think you and I don't have to put that into AI to find out that you aren't going to be impressed with what it gives you back and you aren't going to
Right.
agree with it, right? So then the question is, if an LLM with all of its access to data and its ability to interpret all of those pieces throughout history can't come to the pattern of what is it to make a world epic piece of music, then what can it be besides a felt experience? So if you look at the Pirates of the Caribbean music, you might try and dissect it mechanically and say, okay, well, where are the notes? Can I find patterns in the music in the way that I understand it? And it's like you might find some patterns, but I can guarantee you a pattern you'll feel is a large portion, a large percentage of the average person who hears it experiences something sufficiently profound to differentiate that piece of music from a lesser piece of music. You could play it alongside five other pieces across a random set of human beings, and they'll generally pick that one. And I've listened to Peterson talk with art experts, or even when he talks about his own experience of art and looking through literally thousands of pieces of art before you establish an eye for masterpieces, right? And then for someone like you, I imagine that's easy to conceptualize because it sounds like that's how you feel with music, that you can you can see it and identify it as epic and meaningful, but to be able to just simply recreate it or even describe to someone what are the components that make something epic and meaningful would be very, very difficult to do. But once you did it, you would be able to predict that it would resonate with a large group of people.
It's both. It's the intuition because that takes you farther than the logic does, but it is also the logic because when I'm writing a melody, I'm noticing problems. And you probably notice this like when you write you know, just write in general. If you like use the same word over and over in a row in non a poetic way, you go like, oh, that's a bit too
Yeah.
I'm not like switching the thing enough. And so like, when I write a melody, I look at it and I go, oh, that's too close together, or oh, that's too far apart. That's too much of a reach. And there's this way of like logically just looking at it and going like, I can look at that, but I don't have to hear it, and I know it's going to be bad because it's just unless it's like some doing something crazy, I can't even imagine. It's probably not going to be, you know, the thing. But you know, what's more powerful than somebody who knows the logic, somebody who knows the logic and it's like deeply embedded into their intuition and they're like, you know, they're they, can just their mind goes so many music ways naturally because they've practiced the theory of music correctly.
And where did you start and what's changed since you started? So when did you, I guess, tell me a little bit about your musical journey and how you developed the ability to see what you see now and what most people probably can't see.
Yeah, I guess I had an interesting different path, which is I started piano when I was young. And one thing I did with piano was I always wanted to play my own stuff. And so I did that. And I originally didn't want people to hear it. I just wanted to figure it out. And so I actually spent years, and I still do this. I love doing it, improvising, just sitting down at the piano, making stuff up. And I kept throughout this endeavor trying to sit down and write a piece of music. But every time I did, I would sit down and I would go like, I improvise something. And I'm like, it's mediocre. Like, how do I make something that's actually good? And so, I mean, I spent a long time thinking about uh, what makes good music, just analyzing it. And it's just a bizarrely, it's a weird thing where this is probably how esoteric things is. It's like it's always right in front of you, but just impossible to see, just like the way, your mind works. And so, I mean, I actually had like a weird, like a vision where this famous EDM musician told me that the secret to music was rhythms and beats. And that helped me a lot understanding that it's a higher dimensional, it's just a higher abstract space. And so I think maybe one of the big things that led me to actually being able to understand music logically was that I spent just years just constantly making different melodies and never making anything that was good. Or never making anything that I wanted to like write down and like sort of like really keep.
So you didn't achieve your own standard and that's changed?
Yeah, I think I can write melodies now for the first time. And I mean, I've been improvising melodies for years, but I think I can finally write melodies.
And we talked about it a little bit before, but what is the underlying drive? So I mean, obviously, in order to get to a place where you can write melodies and you contrast that with the number of times you threw things out that took your time, energy, patience, and everything you could put together, right? And so what is it that is pulling you forward to say this is this is something I need to learn how to do?
It's just super fun. That's that's the big thing. I mean, now what led me actually to write this melody is I'm wanting to like compile a bunch of information and like show people here's a way to do art. That's what I want to show people. And one of the things I know how to do, I figured out I knew how to do this was how to write music, but I just haven't done it. And so I wanted to write this music because I'm like, well, if I want to show people how to write music, then I should probably write music myself.
Yeah, good idea. No, I'm really interested to hear some. I hope when you finish it, you share it.
Yeah, maybe after this, I don't know if it's, yeah, I'll share it. I'll share it. Yeah.
No pressure. I mean, I don't mean to put any pressure. I
Oh
just
no,
mean,
I will. I
yeah,
want to. Yeah,
yeah, good for
absolutely.
you. Good for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being interested. I don't know. You're, yeah, maybe it's that like really expert, like Canadian conversational skill where like you, you talk about things that I'm actually interested in. Um, I mean, the whole conversation was, but I mean, like personal things, because I don't think you do music. And so I'm also like, I don't want to go off on a subject where it's just like, just interesting to me.
Oh no, I love music. I love music. I play the guitar badly, but to me, I tell people guitar for me is like golf. It's one of those things that I'm very content to play badly and have for like 20 years. I can play well enough that I could sit around a campfire with my kids and play songs and sing, but mostly it's like it's social lubricant. And then music is always playing in my house. My wife and I, the first years after we got married, we lived in New Orleans. And I don't know if you've ever visited New Orleans, but if you're a music lover, I really highly like. I mean, it's one of my favorite places, maybe my favorite place in the world. But it's just really, really high caliber musicians everywhere you go. There's music everywhere, and it just always felt like home to me because of that. That you go to a place where there's just always good music playing in the background. Every restaurant, all the bars, not everyone, but lots and lots of them. And yeah, I just there's something extraordinary about music, and it's more popular than ice cream, I think, among people, right? So yeah, I know I'm very interested in it, and when people are good at it, they're good friends to have. They're good guests.
What music do you listen to?
I listen to a lot of different music. I'd say I like my wife and I both I listened to a lot of hip hop when I was younger, rock music. I like indie folk and like folk music right now. My wife
Yeah,
likes
that's great
country.
music.
I don't like country music, but what I find is we meet at folk. Like for some reason it's just like we like bands. I really like band music. Like I think there's something about um just hearing it all the when people are able to create that synchronous sound from multiple instruments in a supernatural environment, it just lifts me. Like my ideal music is a full band sitting in a relatively private and quiet place and just getting to listen to them. I don't like concerts, large groups of people, and normally you end up listening to the people around you more than you can actually hear the show. So I like to be connected with the music, but um, when I'm working, I listen to post rock quite a bit. I find the lyrics distract me from thinking, but melodies will keep me extremely focused on whatever I'm thinking. So I really like background music to my life in general. So I've got music playing hours a day.
Wow.
Yeah, it's great. And I've done that I started thinking with music like in my late teens. And I've done that ever since. All the jobs I ever had, I had headphones at my desk and things like that. I need to drown out the noise, and music works really well for like the more complex the task, the more I like to have a melody keeping me focused on it.
Yeah, I love music. I, every now and then I come across like a piece of music that's new, and I'm just like, oh, it's like a new place in it feels even more than like an emotional space. Like I think that's how we think about music is like we think about it in terms of emotions, but it's like this new area. It's just this new thing, whatever it is. I really love music.
I'd love to hear you explain that more. So, like, I think of music as it does trigger an experiential response. If I'm engaged in an intellectual discussion for hours, like maybe even after this conversation, it will be very regulating for me to just go for a walk. And one guaranteed way for me to enhance the quality of that walk would just be to put music in my ears. It's like it'll just calm the whole process. It's a very regulating. It's yeah. It's not just a distraction of thought. It's something beyond that. It's very experiential to me. Um, and so I wonder, like, does that resonate with you? Is it something that you feel, or is it something that exists on another plane in some kind of a logical domain for you, or is it merely like you can just close your eyes and sit in your studio and listen to music for 8 hours and get lost there?
When I listen to music, it feels like it's some like when I hear a song that's good, I'm like happy to know the song. It feels like there's something about music where just being around it, you know, I'm getting something deep from it. Um, I go through different phases where I listen to music and don't listen to music. Um, and maybe that's because I really analyze it, like I try to understand it. Um, um, so I also have a relationship with music where I'm always like, not always, but oftentimes trying to thinking about what the music is doing. Um, and I have this is I- an interesting phenomena that I feel sometimes when I hear a song for the first time, a song for the first time, or music in general for the first time. That's really really good. I'll hear it for the first time, and I'll have the sense that whatever it's showing me is new, but like it's something that I have this feeling like, oh, it's like that thing. Like I'm like I what it is so real that um I feel like I discovered almost like coming across like a new country. Like it's like you come to a new country, you're like, oh wow, this new country has this
You
all, you
feel
know,
the
these
genes turning
cultures.
on. It changes you.
Right,
It
right.
changes you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So is it the music? So one of the things I've realized more recently, I mentioned you I liked hip hop when I was younger. I didn't read literature. I was a math kid. Like I did math and physics and then became an engineer and I never like I pretty much copied people's English papers and didn't read books at all when I was in high school. And hip hop artists were some of the like hip hop lyrics that I was listening to were some of the most deeply poetic influences that I had early in my life. And I really connected with lyrics a lot. In your case, are you referring to music, like music, the melody, the sound? I mean, and you're connected to EDM, so I'm guessing it's less about the artistry embedded in lyrics and songwriting, and more about the music itself.
Well, I mean, my first thing I would notice would be the melody and that, but the all of it, all the way up, stacked to the very top, between as well as like your interpretation of the lyrics, is part of the resonance of music. So like I notice as well in music, like the sounds. If somebody's like talking, like rapping, hip hop, they're like saying words that rhyme. Like part of the music is because they're saying words that rhyme, which has this like stacking up. It's like a harmony. It's
Yeah,
like
like a vocal effect. It's really just
right.
the vocal itself rather than the content of the message in that case. It's got an additive effect of being relevant in the context of the melody.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and I do though, like I certainly like appreciate the lyrics of music, but I also now I'm at a place where I rarely hear music lyrics that like I when I was maybe younger, when I would hear music lyrics, there was this feeling of something ethereal and grand, and like there was this space they were describing, oftentimes in different, worlds I wouldn't have access to, these ways of living. But now I, if they're describing something, it's like, either it's philosophically sound or it's not, or either it's a like I know too much that like I don't know, like lyrics. I don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. Like if it's a pattern that's repeating, if it's like the same archetype, if it's the same idea, if it's the same message, I've heard it before, it doesn't mean anything to me. Like that, and that's why music. the structure of it is something I always keep paying attention to, is because the music in itself has a more high probability of having something that I've never experienced than the lyrics saying something.
That's very interesting.
Well, thank you for being interested. You're, you got, yeah,
Now, cool. Um, yeah, I'd love to chat with you again sometime. I'm just running out of steam now.
yeah,
I think we'll just have to find another question that's interesting and we'll tackle it then. You're
yeah,
doing you're
100%.
doing Juan's Dragon Slayers too, so I'm sure
Yep.
we'll run across each other there too. But I'll keep an eye out for.
You wouldn't want to run across me in a Dragon Slayers. I'll tell
Is
you
that
that.
right?
'Cause,
Ooh. Okay. Let's. No, it's been. I actually really like those sessions. Have been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed them. It's given me some pressure to better understand the content.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, man, this was really, really fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
And yeah, we should absolutely do it again.
Sounds good. All right. Well, take care of yourself. Have a good long weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right. See you, Josh.